Welcome to Fiduciary Trust International's Women in Wealth, Navigating Transitions with Confidence webinar. I'm Paulina Mejia, National Fiduciary Counsel, and today we're going to be talking about some of the ways in which we can help clients navigate some of life's most challenging but also common transitions, including but not limited to the loss of a spouse, cognitive decline in a loved one, and divorce. I'm joined by my colleagues, Karen Pei, who's Head of Portfolio Management and Equities, and we're thrilled to have her insights.
Great to be here, Paulina. I'm looking forward to this really important discussion today.
Excellent. And we're also joined by Taylor Custis, Trust Counsel, who also has some wonderful experience in a lot of the areas that we're going to be talking about.
Thanks, Paulina. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, too, so I'm really happy to be here today.
We're here today to share with you some of our insights based on our work with clients and some of our personal experiences too in navigating some of these transitions, which of course impact men and women alike. And yet women are in a unique position sometimes when these transitions happen, primarily because statistically we have longer lifespans, and also because we tend to wear many hats throughout our lives. We tend to be multitaskers, and sometimes we put our careers on hold, and sometimes we ramp them up, all while juggling other aspects of our family's lives. In addition to this, we have big financial responsibilities as well. Women control about 85% of the spending decisions for their households. We also control $11 trillion, which is about 31% of household assets. So that's a very big responsibility that's integrated into the daily lives that we have. At the same time, depending upon whatever stage we're at, our attention tends to go where it's needed the most. So if something happens that is unrelated to what we've been focusing on now, we can often be caught flat-footed. And the goal of this webinar is to ensure that you engage early with your plan so that regardless of where your attention is at the moment, if something does happen, you feel prepared. That's really the intention that we have here. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm really, really grateful that you've all joined the webinar. So if there is one thing that we hope that you take away from this webinar is that it's so important to engage early and often with your plan, so that if any of these transitions do happen to come along, you will be in the best possible position to navigate it with the help of your team. So with that, we're going to get started with Karen. I'm going to ask you what you've seen as one of the most common or some of the most common issues that women face in dealing with these transitions.
So yes, women are oftentimes engaged in some aspects of finances or the household decision. Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, women are oftentimes a decision maker around a good percentage of financial decisions in the household. They might be oftentimes the ones that are paying the bills, they're doing the grocery shopping, they're taking care of the kids, right? But they're not engaged in other aspects of the household finances. Mm-hmm. They may not have a great understanding of what the total income is for the household. Yeah. They may not have a sense of what the balance sheet in totality looks like. And oftentimes we find that women are not involved in the overall estate planning process, which is so important, so critical, because that's not just what's happening in their lives currently, but it's what could potentially happen in the future and if circumstances change in their life. So we oftentimes will encourage women and the men in their life to engage their partner and to engage the women, right, in that discussion. So being prepared and also thinking about possible future scenarios, whether it's plan B or plan C, right? It's great to just be prepared for any potential change in life that you may not want to necessarily have to think about at a time of difficult emotional situations. Right, so I think that it's always great to kind of think about these plans when you have a clear head and when you don't have a lot of emotional ups and downs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes. So, and oftentimes women outlive their spouses. And so it's really critical for them to think about the future and to think about what could potentially change and what could potentially happen that may affect their finances and it may affect their life. So, you know, for example, you know, having to deal with potentially unexpected death, right, of their spouse. That's something oftentimes that we see women having to face at a difficult time and when emotions are running high. So, you know, and I know, Paulina, you've dealt with a lot of clients in these circumstances. What are some of the things that you see or what you advise women in terms of what they should be thinking about in the case of, you know, their spouse passing?
Yeah, well, I think you said it really. I think that it's a topic that nobody really wants to think about. And your lives are so busy that it's a very easy thing to put off and not say, oh, hey, I know that we signed our estate planning documents. I'm not really sure what they mean. Why don't we go through them and understand what happens if something were to happen to you tomorrow? Nobody really wants to do that. But I would say that it is the regret that most people have that they didn't. Because once your husband does die, that's not something that you want to be dealing with for the very first time. So I think that that's probably, to your point, to engage before somebody is sick or before there's severe cognitive decline. When you really want to have an understanding of what your plan means. It may be on paper and you may have had a very, very good comprehensive plan. But if you haven't sat down to really understand what's going to happen when your spouse dies, what entities are going to be created, what that means for your children, what it means for your community. I mean, certainly if it's a second or third marriage and they're children from other marriages, what does that mean too? Who's going to be the administrator of the estate, right? The executor. That's a really big responsibility, and oftentimes the surviving spouse is named as executor. But if that comes as a surprise and all of the things that need to be done to administer an estate are put on top of, you know, the grieving process of losing a spouse, that's really, really tough. So I think that the one thing I would say to our clients is to take a look at your estate plan, understand what it means, make sure you know who your fiduciaries are, try and have a conversation with your spouse and also with your children so that you can get ahead of things so that when something traumatic does happen, you're as prepared for it, at least technically, as you can be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Paulina, actually, what are some of the first steps that you recommend women do when their spouse passes? How should they prioritize? Should an estate plan be the first thing that they prioritize?
So I would say no. I would say don't make any big decisions right after the loss of a spouse. And most plans, I mean, certainly most plans contemplate a second to die. And so most of our clients, when their spouse dies, there is an estate plan for them. The question will be, is that the plan that they want to have for the future? And that's something that needs to be thought through with time, with the help of a team. Really, once you get your arms around what your cash flow needs are, who your beneficiaries are, in what form you want to leave assets to, you know, your children and your community. So those are all things that take time and a little bit of clarity. I think the first thing that you would wish for anybody who's gone through a transition like that is the space to really grieve and not have to do or make any real big decisions right away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and often, you know, by the time a spouse dies, often it's been a stressful period anyway. There's oftentimes been some cognitive decline and issues that come along with that. So they're really exhausted, and it's just not a time to make really big, important decisions. And I know, Taylor, you have a lot of experience with managing the issues that come along with cognitive decline. And I think that it's a long process, isn't it? And what are some of the things that people should think about when they start seeing early signs of it?
You know, cognitive decline doesn't happen overnight. It often starts to manifest itself years in advance. Mm-hmm. And for many people, it does slowly progress. And there are certainly signs along the way. I think for the families who are willing to have some tough conversations and maybe start asking some questions, could this be more than just maybe getting older, and also seek medical help, I think they're in the best position to be prepared and to plan. I think knowledge is power, and seeking the medical advice early early allows a family to know what medical treatments may be out there. It's certainly, the goal is to be able to hold steady for as long as you can and prevent further cognitive decline. And there are some drugs that are out there that are helping with that. You know, I know we'll get into this more in the next question, but there are a lot of financial and organizational aspects that can be done in advance. There are numerous to-dos and decisions that really have to be made. And I think to the extent that a family can work together and get a lot of those accomplished, it will minimize the emotional strain later. From an emotional perspective, I think it's almost difficult to prepare for cognitive decline. I think there's a spectrum of emotions that occur, anywhere from denial, fear, anger, grief, and eventually some acceptance. And on any given day, you're managing your own emotions, then vis-a-vis the loved one who's experiencing the cognitive decline. And then you're also, you have your extended family members and often your siblings. And on any given day, they may not be on the same page as you emotionally or in terms of making decisions. So it's just a lot to handle, and you're in it for the long haul. Paulina, in our work with families, we often say that thoughtful and intentional communication is so important, and that's never been more true than it is with a family member with cognitive decline. I think that the way a family has maybe interacted and communicated in the past, it just changes, and it has to as the disease progresses. And I think sometimes it takes a while for family members to realize what the new normal is going to be. Learning how to communicate effectively within the family and with your loved one is so important. And as it does change throughout the disease, it's important to adapt. I'll give a few examples. At first, I would say that it's so important to not want to correct your loved one when they've said something wrong, misplaced something wrong. They know they're slipping. They may have already had their diagnosis, but they're scared. And I think they know they have a diagnosis, and they're scared. And so just correcting them only reinforces it. It certainly doesn't help. I know so many women, we're fixers and we want to take charge. This is a long journey, so I think it's also important to remember to stop and take a deep breath sometime, and not everything has to be done at once. And you can move as the situation evolves and adjust as needed throughout the process. And finally, I would say it's just so important to remember the humanity of this situation and to communicate and talk with your mother, your father, your grandparent, just like they've always been, and not think of them as somebody with cognitive decline. They really just want to be the loved one that you've always known them as, and they don't want to be treated any differently.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
And I think it probably requires a lot of emotional bandwidth that not everybody is ready to have, right? And so
patience.
And patience. So you alluded to this, like what are some of the steps that you can have control over when you're faced with something that you have no control over, really, that could help you kind of create that space to be as present as you need to be?
Paulina, I know we talked earlier about the legal documents, which are so critical to have in place, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg. There are a handful of things I'll mention, and the goal here is just simplification to reduce complexity and help protect the assets. First of all, I'd say financial accounts. Consolidate the accounts, checking, savings, money markets. Many families have multiple accounts, and they may have served a purpose many years ago, but you can consolidate now. It's a good idea to have a household bill pay account if one doesn't exist already, and certainly to automate as many bills as possible, and maybe add one of family members' name to that household bill pay account. By no means are we suggesting to add to multiple accounts, because that can mess up an estate plan, but a household bill pay account will be really important. Passwords, login information. It's so important to have a list of what those passwords are for your loved one, because that that will create a lot of headaches without that. If you have a safe deposit box, is only one spouse's name on it, or is both spouses? Years ago, we added our names to my parents' safe deposit box. It was a very simple process of signing a paper. So if there is a safe deposit box, we never want just one name on it. And certainly we've always said that it's not an ideal place to store legal documents. It's so important to safeguard tangible personal property too, whether there might be valuable art in the home. And I also think about jewelry, the smaller items. They're easily going to get lost or misplaced, and it's just sad if that were to occur. So at some point, that needs to be addressed as well. And last, I would say, if you have the benefit of having a long-term care policy, make sure your family has a copy of it. Understand what the terms are and the benefits. Become registered as a designated agent with the insurance company, so they'll speak to you on your loved one's behalf.
Right.
And then understand what the process is for beginning a claim.
Yeah.
Such good advice.
Thank you.
It is, and it's important to kind of have a roadmap when you are dealing with something that's so difficult. At least you do have control over some things.
Few things.
Yes, few things.
I can see myself on one of your points, that I think I'm helping by correcting and by, telling them where something is, but I might actually be making them feel worse.
It's hard to not do that in the beginning, but over time, you just roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's common, and it's something that a lot of people have to deal with. So thank you for your insights, Taylor. And another very difficult, yet unfortunately common transition that a lot of people go through is divorce. Of course, it affects men and women equally, but what are some of the things that you've seen that are specific to women, or that women clients kind of have to focus on more after a divorce? And how have you helped them through that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's very common. It's a very common occurrence. I mean, over 50% of marriages end in divorce, and sometimes we see multiple marriages and divorces occur. And so it's not an easy thing. It's obviously can be a very emotional event. And so we talked a lot about being prepared for multiple scenarios. As secure as one might feel about those current circumstances, it's always good to think about possible changes in life and transitions. And so just by way of example, I'm happy to kind of share my own experience in the sense that and I'm not an expert on divorce or anything like that, but I about 8 years ago, my husband at that time, he had an accident that caused him temporary blindness in one eye, and that sort of led him to reevaluate his life and sort of his priorities, and that led him to make a decision to take early retirement. And so we had to essentially go through the process of thinking about our total financial picture, to think about our estate plan, to think about our plans for the kids, and how are we going to pay for education, and everything gets sort of revamped, and you have to reassess. So whether it is a divorce, or it could be just a sudden change in your life circumstances, being able to go through what your cash flow is, what your budget is, and to go through some of those estate planning documents, or how your assets are titled. That's really important, because having an estate of 20 million is very different than an estate of 10 million. So when you go through, or when someone goes through that segregation of assets in the case of a divorce, it's very challenging, right? And it is really important for women to kind of think ahead about what would happen if this were the case. What would happen if if the total assets are half of what they are, right? And where will the income come from? And what would happen if someone is not currently working? Do they have to get another job? Or do they have to change their job? Do they have to perhaps go back to school and think about, how they're going to fund that, and what are they going to think of, what are they going to do in terms of speaking to their children about education. Things, everything kind of comes into play. So I do think that when women are better prepared to go through some of those possible scenarios at a time when they're more calm, and at a time when they're not having to deal with the emotional roller coaster of a potential divorce.
Right.
It's much easier to think rationally, to be able to assess the circumstances much better.
Sure.
And we women, we're fortunate because oftentimes we have friends, we have a great network, we have great resources that we can go to, and that's another really important aspect. Having someone that you can trust, that you can talk to, and it could be a trusted financial advisor, because it's really critical to have someone that is not emotionally tied to make some sound decisions, make some rational decisions, and not decisions that are necessarily forced or that are short-sighted potentially. So I think that's really crucial.
Oh, those are all great points. I think one of the things that you said that struck me was, once a divorce happens, you're the sole decision maker over a pool of assets. Maybe not all of them, because if there are children involved, you still have some sort of shared responsibility towards them. But for women post-divorce, that is a big transition. They are the ones taking a look at the portfolio and saying, what do I want this portfolio to do for me? And how do you kind of walk women through that when they're taking a look at their assets and kind of laying out their goals, and how do you explain to them, how to think through their investments?
Yeah, I think you hit that right on point, right? It's really thinking about what is important to women and to you, right, as an individual, as well as what it means as a family, right?
Yep.
And going through and reassessing your assets may affect how you think about your investment goals or your investment objective. So, I think that, for example, in a case where the total assets are joint and a much bigger pool of assets, the objective for the family may be different. It may be a little bit more aggressive. But if the assets are now all of a sudden halved and income is halved, then the approach might be different. It may require much more conservatism.
Yep.
It may require, certainly a reassessment of what the potential distribution might be out of the portfolio.
Sure.
So I think that those are all really important aspects of the decision making that women have to consider. And then there are investment objectives that may impact the children. And when women go through their financial planning and get to a point where they have to think about their estate, they might also want to think about what their retirement plan looks like. When we're going through all of the asset gathering stage, right, it's important to think about the real estate, how it's titled, like Taylor was saying, and how that may affect the total pool of assets that would then lead to helping you determine what the right objective and right asset allocation would be. So all of it is tied, and at the, you don't really know what your objective is until you have a great understanding of the total picture.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful.
So Paulina, as you worked with women dealing with transitions, what are some of the key aspects or some of the key steps to success?
Yeah, I think that, it's difficult. It's easy for me to say because a lot of these transitions are very hard and ones that you wish weren't happening. But I think that once you kind of get over that hump of acceptance that it is happening, to engage with it, I think that that's really the most important thing. So, acting like it's not happening isn't going to help anybody. And if you're willing to say, okay, maybe this isn't something that I spent a lot of time on, but I want to learn. I want to leverage my team who's here to help me, and I want to really find out about my portfolio. And these are all things, it could be an opportunity. It's a challenge, but I think to view it as an opportunity to learn more, to get engaged. And I think that it's wonderful to see women feel really empowered once they start engaging, because they are interesting topics, and it's, you know, maybe you just haven't had the time to do it because you've been doing so many other things. And I've seen a lot of women get really interested in a lot of this stuff and kind of find a new chapter. And that's a really, so I think that kind of perspective, the opportunity or the silver lining to something that could be hard that you wish hadn't happened, but there is another side to it. And I think that with the right team in place and, you know, the right community, it could be a wonderful thing to do. It could also be an opportunity to maybe correct some things that happened. For example, like if at the death of the spouse you realize that your children really didn't know what the plan was going to be, and you had to deal with explaining it to them without the benefit of having your spouse there with you to say, you know, you're beneficiaries of a trust not because we don't trust you, but for this, this, and that reason, right? So conversations that could have not been so difficult, it's an opportunity to engage your kids in a way that makes them feel part of the plan, because they are, without, you know, you can devolve as many details as you want, but I think that the point is that it's going to happen. It'll happen at some point. And so to do it at a time where you're prepared and you're in a good place, it's better for everybody to have that communication, Taylor, that you talked about earlier, is really key to making any plan successful. And sometimes, you know, families really do come together in ways that are unexpected after some of these harder transitions. So that's what I've seen. And I'd love to know what you guys have seen too, especially in terms of engaging kids and the next generation after a transition like this. Taylor, I'd love your thoughts on this.
I'd echo your sentiments earlier that being proactive, we know at least one of these is going to occur, right?
Yeah.
But to be proactive, and I think it's so valuable that if you become more informed on these topics, that you're able to then teach your children and share more. And certainly having these conversations when a family's not in crisis mode. The earlier families start these regular conversations, and they don't have to be a full disclosure of everything that a family may have, but even just small conversations. I think it's really important to help prepare everybody. I think when somebody's gone through this transition, as one of these transitions or multiple of these transitions, I think, you know, being honest and sharing with your children what I learned, what I got right. Here's what maybe I didn't get right.
Yeah.
You know, we're not perfect and we're not going to get it right all the time. But I think showing the vulnerability and maybe how we could have done something different, I think it's good for the kids to see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My boys are teenagers now, but when they were younger, and we started doing this a long time ago, I think you mentioned, you know, how do we engage children in some of these conversations and some of these sometimes difficult decisions. In terms of, you know, getting children to be more involved in financial discussions, there are lots of things that we can do in our day-to-day, everyday lives, whether it is just, you know, taking a trip with them to the grocery store, and having them, you know, answer questions about which product is, you know, better value, and having them do the math when it comes to, you know, weighing things, right? Lots of different ways and simple things when your kids are younger. And then when, you know, when my kids were growing up, we watched the show Shark Tank a lot.
So
it was like a regular thing for us, and it was one of these, you know, shows that we did together. It was great family time, but it was also educational. And it really fostered a nice entrepreneurial spirit in them. But it was great to kind of go through some of the financial, you know, the financial points, right? When it comes to what does it mean to have an equity stake?
Right.
What does it mean to make a loan? What does it mean to do a royalty? And we would always ask them kind of like, would you make that deal, and why or why not? And it was great conversation. So there's lots of different ways that I think, you know, we can engage our children in some of these conversations so that they're more aware of, you know, finances. And then there are other things that, you know, we can do as parents, whether it's setting up a 529 plan, or you know, and that is an great way for them to, at the right age, right? So I think it's important to kind of have a sense of when is the right age appropriateness to talk to your kids about different levels of financial decision making. But I know that, you know, with my son, my older son, when we were going through like the college application process, that was a great eye opener for him. To one, actually understand that there are taxes to be paid from on income, and that education doesn't come free, so he better work hard, right? And I also think that it was also an opportunity for me to kind of share what his asset allocation looked like in his 529 plan, and how those finances go with the financial aid package, or that we were applying for. So taking every opportunity that you can to kind of talk to your kids about finances at at their level and at a point that you're comfortable, I think is really great. And then at some point, it's good to go through and to talk to them about what does it mean to save for their future, and saving a percentage of whether it's their allowance, or saving a percentage of the gifts that they receive, or the trust fund that they have. These are all really important decisions that children need to have an understanding of, so that they can take some level of accountability, so that they have a stake in their future.
Yeah, and having it be an ongoing dialogue, right? I think that none of this happens just once. I think it's making it part of the way that you speak as a family. So those are really good tips. So wrapping up and looking ahead, with financial resources and longer lifespans, women today are in a great position to really take ownership of and become engaged with their plans. We all face transitions. They're inevitable. We can either be surprised by them, or we can choose to be ready. Karen, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, and Taylor, you too. I think that it's been really helpful, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. We would love to know your thoughts. There is a survey that you see on the screen. If you could please submit your comments, remarks, questions, we'd love to hear. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you for your attention.